Hello to all my net deckers. This one's for you guys. It's the Rare Hunter here, back with my Aggro Oldhim deck tech. This is the deck I used to top 8 the first ever Flesh and Blood World Championships. A quick shout out to Spencer for working on this deck with me. I went 4 wins and 1 loss in the CC portion of the tournament and finished with a 13-3 record, which put me in 4th after Swiss. Unfortunately, I lost in the top 8. So sorry to all my Oldhim haters. I was unable to get Living Legend points to get this guy out of Classic constructed, but I think we made a decent run. Now before we get started, I'm going to need you guys to hit that subscribe button for me, maybe even click that like button. Help your boy out. Save your questions for later and leave a comment if I missed anything. Now, why Oldhim? I was originally going to play an updated version of Combo Fi that Spencer and I played at Nationals, but I was getting crushed by this Ice Oldhim list. I basically played like 7 games online leading up to Worlds, and that was pretty much the extent of my testing. My preparation was really minimal, and a lot of the deck building was theory. However, we felt like the matchup-wise, the Aggro Oldhim deck was pretty good into our expected meta. We expected the most popular deck to be Fi, Icelander, and Oldhim, and I think Dromai was one of those dark horse decks that I thought was going to make a splash at Worlds. This deck felt very good against Fi and aggro decks in general, and our sledge plan against the mirror was something that we were just very comfortable with. Against Icelander, we play some extra copies of Pummel, which I believe would have swung the matchup a little more compared to a stock list. And this deck was surprisingly good against Dromai, as they have kind of a problem dealing with large attacks and pummels every turn. Now, onto the actual deck. We played 10 pieces of equipment / weapon, Crater Fist, Crown of Seeds, Tunic, and Iron Legs. Ironhide Legs are your standard loadout. There's not really much to explain. These are just the most blocks and most efficient. Winter's Wail and Stalagmite are going to be your main weapon and offhand. Now, contrary to conventional wisdom or maybe like the older meta, Oldhim is better off using Stalagmite over Rampart. Stalagmite is free, you don't have to pay any resources into it, and the meta has evolved to be so aggressive and quick because of Fi that you don't really have time to get your value out of Rampart. Rampart is mostly good when it was like a heavy Runeblade meta with Chain or Dash, where they're breaking the combat chain so that you're able to get multiple activations of Rampart, increasing the block from 1 to 2 to maybe even 3. That's when you get the most value out of Rampart, and then in conjunction with Crown of Seeds or maybe like Arcane Barrier, you get a lot more value out of it. However, nowadays, I think Aggro Oldhim, the playstyle requires you to keep maybe 3 cards in hand, and you really don't want to spend a blue to Crown and Rampart. It's just not really the best use of the blocks that you use. You really want to like trade 1 card for 1 card. So instead, we ice react a lot more in this deck compared to normal, and that will be our defensive options. But we still have Rampart in the deck for Dash and Dromai. Originally, we were actually at a point where we were going to cut Rampart from the deck completely, because we weren't really predicting to play against many Dash players, and against Dromai, you probably can win with Stalagmite anyway. But we decided to go with Winter's Wail, Rampart against Dromai, because maybe late game you'll get some value out of blocking with Rampart along with Crown on some of the Ash Wings if they try to fatigue you. So in most matchups, you will be using Stalagmite and not Rampart. We just ended up keeping Rampart as a hedge. It was a 1-card hedge against Dash, which I ended up losing to anyway, so it didn't really matter. And I didn't get to play against any Dromais, but that's perhaps besides the point. And your remaining weapons / equipment are your 2 no rune pieces. Against Runeblade, you will be playing just the no rune boots along with your Crater Fist, Crown, and Tunic setup. And then against Wizard, so like Kano and Icelander, you'll have AB2 plus Crown. You can also go AB2 against Viscerai to fatigue them if you really wanted to. The deck can do that still, even without all the defensive cards, but I don't think it's necessary. And finally, Sledge is only for the mirror. It makes the mirror kind of like, it's very reductive gameplay, and you kind of simplify the game. But it helps you fatigue if you want to fatigue, but 6 damage is just a lot. And you can this and Sledge helps you pitch stack very easily. Starting with the red cards, we play 15 on-hit effects, so Chokeslam, Command and Conquer, Crush the Weak, Endless Winter, and Spinal Crush. That averages out to about 1 per cycle. Chokeslam is pretty good against Fi and Briar and Viscerai. Command and Conquer is just pretty good, especially into aggro decks, because sometimes they want to, in the matchup against Oldhim, they tend to want to Arsenal to play for like a 4 or 5 card hand. Command and Conquer really disrupts them when they want to do that. Crush the Weak is a card that's really good against Fi in particular, and even against like Viscerai and Briar. They have stuff like Gloomveil and Shrill that they can't play. Endless Winter just has a ton of text. Spinal Crush is good against pretty much every single deck. Most decks want to play multiple cards per turn, and even against Guardian, 5 for 9 is a decent hit. Next, we have the Go Again package, pretty much. So we have Enlightened Strike, Outmuscle, and Zealous. And also we play the 1 blue Rouse. You're going to bring these in against your Icelanders and Dromai. Generally, when your on-hit effects aren't good, you want your Go Again package. So usually that means like your bad matchups. Outmuscle in particular is quite good against these 2 decks, since it's like an extra breaker against Dromai, which brings us to, I think, about 35 Phantasm Breakers. And against Icelander, you don't mind trading your Outmuscle for their efficient attack, so like Findles, Fighting Spirit, and Wounded Bull. And then in the end, you can still pummel over them. And lastly, Glacial Red is mostly just a card for the mirror. Also, it's another Phantasm Popper. Pretty efficient against Icelander as well, since you could just 6 for 10, and then they can't give you a Frostbite in response. That's not gonna do anything to you. We have 2 yellows in the deck. Got 2 yellow pummels. This is to pay for Spinal Crush, so that you can pitch a blue and then pitch a yellow pummel, and that's 5 resources perfectly. I'm just kidding. This is just for damage. Originally we had 8 pummels, but we slowly cut more cards, and I think Spencer just liked yellow pummels for damage. Personally, I think that's disrespect and bad deck building, but feel free to swap it out, whichever numbers you want. These could just be blue pummels. Personally, I think we should just go back up to like 7 or 8 pummels. So the deck does not play any defense reactions, and that's because defense reactions only do one thing. They block. They're like the least versatile cards in the game. So instead of playing defense reactions, we simply aim to ice react our opponents every turn. The point of the deck is that it aims to trade damage with disruption. You win a turn cycle by using your ice react to limit your opponent's damage, while still be able to swing back with an effective on hit. So your 4-card hand would be like ice react you, and then pitch 2 cards to attack with Spinal. Or you block 1 card for 3, ice react them, and then your turn is Tunic, pitch a blue, Endless Winter, or Chokeslam. So it doesn't mean that this Oldhim deck is not going to block, but you try to get extra mileage out of your cards. So an Ice React could be trading a card for 4 or more damage, which is effectively equal to a classic Sink Below or better. 3 blue Autumn's Touch. It's fairly standard. It's a block 3, and sometimes you get the value out of Earth reacting with Oldhim. But mostly you want to Ice React. This usually just comes in handy in the mirror, where you can use your 2 block Ice card, for example, and then you Earth React Autumn's Touch to block a Winter's Will perfectly. Or you're trading, like, you're blocking 2 instead of 3, and then you get to keep a card at the bottom of your deck. The blue ice cards. So originally the deck started with 18 blue ice cards, but we had to find a room in the deck for other cards, other sideboard space, basically. And the 2 latest editions ended up being like the Expose the Elements and the Rouse the Ancients. we basically maxed out on all the best ice cards. So Channel Lake Frigid, Winter's Grasp, and to an extent Winter's Bite. Channel Lake is just the best ice card. One of the key reasons to play ice in general. But I think in this deck, I tend to play it less often. Usually I play it when I'm actually behind. Hopefully I hit one of their 4 red turns and then they don't get to do anything. Because usually when I'm ahead, I want to be trading with a disruptive on-hit attack so like that actually trades damage, which can end the game quicker, along with being able to disrupt them rather than kind of just hopefully disrupting them with Channel Lake. Anyway, the rest of the ice cards are kind of just utility cards. Most of the time, they don't matter anyway. So we just decided to play different ones just to randomly get some value wherever possible. So we only play 1 Blizzard because Spencer hates drawing 2 of these in the same hand. You can ice rack one of them, and then you can play the other. But then there are times where your opponent is coming at you for 2 cards for like 6 or 7. So Enlightened Strike for 7, and you want to block. Well, this card is pretty awful against that. So it's also like bad against the mirror, and you just kind of hope you don't draw your 1 Blizzard or Heart of Vandal in the same hand. So only having 1 Blizzard is nice. The best is usually just like playing it against a Belittle before they get their blue Minnowism, and then you just shut them out of their turn. So it's good to have 1, but Blizzard is usually bait, and you'll try to outsmart yourself trying to get value out of it. The 2 Cold Snap, it's just random value. Lets you cycle your bad hand. You can catch your opponent with their pants down if they're trying to set a 5-card hand. 1 Frostfang. On the off chance that you need to pummel it late game, it has a purpose. Who am I kidding? It's just a whale for 4 angle. 1 Icequake. Best application for this is just +1 to Command and Conquer, and then it comes for 7, Frostbite on hit, and blow up your arsenal. 2 Polar Blasts. This card can help close out a game by giving your card Dominate. This usually comes up more often in the mirror match. You won't need to fuse your Glacial, for example. You can simply play this from your arsenal and let your opponent decide. And yeah. 3 Terror Sunder. This card is very good. If you're playing Sledge, you need to max out on this card. I've seen some lists with only 2, and it's really strong late game, especially if you've gone through their armor. It helps you. It's just like an extra. It's a blue that blocks 3 and gives you so much value. Like, it's good. Even with Sledge, 5 damage. Sometimes 5 can't really block it efficiently late game. Expose the elements. It's not really necessary. We played it as kind of like a random gotcha to make our lives easier. If you manage to double fuse in the mirror, even though we only played 3 Autumn's Touch, breaking the Tunic is very good. Otherwise, hitting Crown against a Rampart user is pretty good. Honestly, I've had Crown blown up in the Sledge mirror, and it rarely matters. Against Dromai, you can blow up the Ghostly Touch, but I don't think that one really matters. In the games that Spencer tested, when he didn't expose the elements on the Ghostly Touch just kind of had like 4 counters at the end of the game anyway. Against Dromai, you can blow up the Ghostly Touch, but that doesn't really come up very often. Mostly if they're trying to fatigue you, that's when expose will kind of save you. And against Icelander, you can blow up their boots, which is also really nice. The remaining blue attacks are kind of just fillers. They're Phantasm Breakers. Glacial Blue and Macho Grande Blue in particular can help you close out a game. In general, I would also not heave the Thunderquake. It kind of pigeonholes you to doing just Thunderquake next turn. And you can't crown it away, obviously. So some card considerations. We did not play Hypothermia because Spencer said it's not very good. We did not play Hypothermia because Spencer said it was not very good. Hypothermia kind of forces you to spend your entire turn to play it, and you hope that your opponent doesn't have a hand that folds to it. I don't think this happens very often in Defy, and even then, you would probably rather Winter's Will them instead. The real reason this card was cut from the deck, though, was because Spencer didn't want us to get baited into playing this card. Basically, we wanted to simplify our decisions that we made throughout the game, and we didn't want to decide whether we wanted Hypothermia or Winter's Wail. Ultimately, if your local meta has a lot of Briar and Viserai, feel free to cut some of the other blue ice cards like Frostfang, and you can play Hypothermia over it. No sinks. Again, we found that we didn't really care to bring these in against any of the matchups. We kind of have like a good 60 and just didn't feel like sinks fit into the deck. If you kind of look, we have 6 pummels in the main, and I guess you can maybe like say 2 of the pummels are actually sinks, but the pummels are better than the sinks, so didn't really matter. No staunch either. I felt like it was kind of a crush for the mirror. We're playing Sledge, and if you're doing a Sledge mirror and you're lining up your staunch against their Sledge, it doesn't feel amazing. Ultimately, the mirror comes down to damage. Sideboarding. I'm going to briefly go over some of my sideboarding philosophy. Nothing is perfect, but the important thing is to have sound reasoning for your decisions. So playing against the mirror, this is your equipment loadout, just the standard blocking equipments plus your Sledge. And then I presented 63 to 64 cards against the mirror. I played against, during the tournament, I played against a Whale plus Rampart with my Sledge. I prefer the Sledge side of the matchup because you can get an early life lead just swinging Sledge every turn, and eventually the life lead will mean that they have to start blocking with 2 cards to your Sledge if they haven't already been doing so. And then you just take 1 chip per turn against the Whale. If you get a Frostbite, double blue kind of pays for that. If they ever take damage to swing at you, you just kind of block, and then you can swing back with a Sledge, and it'll be a favorable trade usually. When you play Sledge, the arsenal kind of matters a lot less. Usually you can spend the excess mana on your turn cycle. Usually you can spend excess mana on your turn to cycle a bad arsenal into a slightly better one. So like if you have 2 blues, you can swing Sledge and then cycle your bad arsenal into a better one. But I would prioritize swinging 6 over putting down an arsenal. You can always catch back up in the arsenal with Tunic every 3 cycles. So like blue plus Tunic is... So with 2 cards, you can swing with Sledge and then arsenal the second card. I think the go again cards in the main is fine. But I didn't really like that they kind of mess up your resource ratios. So I don't like having too many reds in the main. Anecdotally, my opponent drew several red heavy hands, and that made his turns awkward. I was pretty happy with Crush the Weak, just as a 2 card 2 for 7. It's basically just another Enlightened Strike. Slightly worse Sledge, basically. But you will need some of these breakpoint, air quotes, breakpoints to eventually chip down the life totals before you win with Pummel or Dominate. The play pattern is to try to arsenal a Pummel, block, and then swing Sledge every turn. Very rarely is it correct to take damage to return damage. Swinging Sledge every turn, especially with 2 blues, means that you're threatening Pummel every turn as well. So we are quite weak to Dominate attacks, but they have to eat a ton of damage to set up a Dominate attack against you. So even if you block 3 and take 7, it's they likely ate a 6 from your Sledge to do so. In Sledge versus Sledge, you'll be blocking 2 cards for 6 and pitching 2 cards to swing for 6. So Sledge makes pitch stacking very easy. And also, again, every 3 turn cycles, you get an arsenal. You get to arsenal a card because of Tunic. It's also really important to use your Tunic to get the most out of your resources, but you can also set up 5 card hands with Tunic on Crown. It's very reductive gameplay with the Sledge mirrors, but it also means that the Oldhim mirrors usually go by pretty quickly, and you don't really go into time. If you are having trouble in the mirror, it's fine to add cards like Heart of Findle. The best tech I've seen is actually Mage Master Boots plus Toma Findle. My opponent played that against me into a heaped Pulverize, which was quite backbreaking. Speaking of which, Pulverize is also pretty good, but I found it really hard to set up, as swinging 6 every turn felt better than taking a turn off and then praying your opponent can't disrupt you. Staunch Response is also fine, But since Oldhim doesn't play Old anymore, it actually feels a bit clunky. Like the only dominant cards are Macho Grande and your Glacials, and if you just block efficiently in the early game, then those will be the only damage that you'll be taking. In the end, these cards just felt like too many cards to dedicate in the mirror, and they weren't really flexible. If your meta is Oldhim heavy, or you have like a lot of Oldhim opponents that you want to get an edge against, those are all pretty good cards to bring in. Against Fi and Briar, and Viserai, this is going to be your main setup. The difference between Fi and the Rune Blades is that you'll have no Rune Boots. So the main cards you're taking out are your Oldhim Mirror Breaker or Oldhim Mirror card, your Go Again package, and then the Expose. We have one Enlightened Strike in the main, just because it's the most flexible card, and it's a fine card. Otherwise, this is the Fi deck. Your game plan is to allow them to hit you with like one attack maybe, and try to ice rack them while holding enough cards to throw an on-hit back their way on their turn. Sometimes this means like not blocking at all. On these turns, you may try to find an opportunity to get Stalagmite trigger off. Command and Conquer Pummel is very backbreaking for Fi. Pummel in general is, as soon as you pummel them and they're at 3 cards, their following turn is very susceptible to an Ice Ract. I very much wish I didn't cut the 7th Pummel, but it was for another Ice Blue, so, Endless Winter is surprisingly good against this matchup, even when it's not fused. A blue plus a Tunic for Endless Winter plays really well. Blue plus Tunic works out for Chokeslam as well. So if they let Endless Winter hit, activating Tunic, Ember Blade, or even their hero ability gives them Frostbite, which is pretty annoying for them. Lynx is a triggered ability, however, so it gets around this effect. When you don't have an arsenal, you're more likely to try to trade a turn cycle to set up an arsenal. So this means you block an Ice React, and then maybe you have a second Ice card for Winter's Will, and then you're going to arsenal your last card. Early game, it's fine to trade aggressively to gain tempo. A good offense is good defense, basically. If your opponent cannot effectively use all 4 cards in their hand, you're ahead. So some things to watch out for. Be aware that your opponent can only trigger Lynx on an attack action card. This means it's not necessary to block the Amber Blade. Do keep in mind that Lynx is how they can close out the life discrepancy quickly, but baiting your opponent to pop it early can also mean that you're safer later on. In general, the longer you can hold Stalagmite, the better you'll be. Rising Resentment is a pretty annoying card because it plays around Stalagmite very well. How it works is on hit, they'll banish like a 0-cost card if they leave with Stalagmite, and the tax effect addition happens before the reduction of Rising Resentment. So they'll be able to play their 0-cost card, breaking the Frostbite without spending a resource. Most games for me play out in a way where I'm at like 30 life and they're at 20, but they're going to be blocking out for the rest of the game. So get them to a 3-card hand on your turn, then Ice Rack them on their turn. Keep in mind that you're not trading too much damage to throw out an attack that can easily be blocked by armor. So this means that an empty Crush the Weak is not the strongest thing that you can be doing, but it's fine if you block with a card, Ice React, and then use your last 2 cards to Crush the Weak them. Crush the Weak and Tear Asunder together is also a very strong play. Against Briar and Viserai, it should play out pretty similarly as well. This is roughly how I would side against Icelander. We'll have the AB2. We will have Stalagmite and Whale because we don't play Arcane Lantern, which is a consideration that you can have. You definitely want Tunic because Tunic helps you play around the Frostbite. It's pretty important. So we have Command and Conquer, and we took out stuff like Chokeslam, Endless Winter, Spinal Crush. Spinal Crush and Endless Winters are both fine. They're pretty reasonable, like 2 cards for 8, 2 cards for 9. I think Spinal Crush can be considered over Command and Conquer, but I think that because Icelander plays some numbers of defense reactions, and there are times where they arsenal a Wounded Bull or Findos Fighting Spirit, they're not always going to be playing that arsenal card out of arsenal. And so Command and Conquer is still pretty good. It helps you trade, and then you can always pummel it very easily. Crush the Weak is just another 3 for 7. You're kind of playing their game by playing Crush the Weak, but it is more efficient than 2 for 8, 2 cards to do 8 damage. Same thing with Enlightened Strike, but Enlightened Strike gets the Go Again mode. This is more important. Your key cards are really just the Go Again cards. You're going to want to Enlightened Strike plus Whale, or Zealous Belting into Whale, Outmuscle into Whale. Pummeling these Zealous Beltings or Outmuscles are pretty important. Late game, your Glacials dominated will help you close out the game. And we have the one expose the elements. One expose the elements to get the boots randomly would be nice. Might not happen, and that's totally fine. One Rouse the Ancients. I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but we only play one Rouse the Ancients because we don't really want to draw multiples. Multiples in the same hand don't work well together. Kind of defeats the purpose. So I guess you could pitch one, but that's still not ideal. So we only played one personally, but if you play more, I can see the reason why. And yeah. Lastly, this is roughly how I would side for Dromai. Not really decided exactly. I don't think the sideboard plan is perfect, but it just so happens that like everything the deck plays is kind of good against Dromai. Usually I don't like going over 60 cards, but against Dromai, against the top decks of the format before, against the top decks of like Dromai, Icelander, and Oldhim, they have a very real possibility of going into fatigue. And in some scenarios like that, it might be better to have more cards. In general, though, because the Phantasm Poppers are so efficient against Dromai, I don't mind having extra copies. We side out some copies of Pummel just to make the deck a bit more, just to slim the deck down a little bit. I don't love siding out my extra blues when I'm bringing in so many reds, but because again the blocks are so efficient, it's usually fine. Again, the main thing about this matchup is using your Go Again attacks like Outmuscle, Zealous Belting, Enlightened Strike, and Rouse the Ancients, and then following up with a different attack. Pummels are very disruptive against them. Terra Sunder is pretty great when they've used up their armor, and then these Glacials can help end the game pretty quickly. If you do want to streamline it down to 60 cards, cards I would probably consider cutting would be like Glacials, probably Chokeslam. So that would be 8 cards, 9 cards, 10 cards. I like the Crush the Weaks because they can combo with Terra Sunder pretty well, but also just like 3 for 7 after throwing a Go Again is pretty good. That's it. I think that is pretty much all I'm going to cover for today, and that's it for the sideboard guide for now. For the tournament, I started 1-2 in my draft pod. At that point, I was kind of already considering. I was kind of just like, oh, maybe I'll make top 64 for min cash. You can make an argument that I had an easier losers bracket, but I genuinely believe that the opponents I played were better than some of the opponents I played during the Pro Tour. So then we went to Classic Constructed. I played against Lexi, Dash, Phi, and Oldhim. To no one's surprise, my loss came at the hands of the Dash player. My opponent played very well and was able to assemble Dash Exodia with 2 induction chambers and 3 plasma purifiers at around turn 5 or 6 while maintaining a high life total of around 30 life. And the game kind of quickly spiraled out of control as they were able to block efficiently and then come at me for 15 every other turn cycle. that's usually how Oldhim versus Dash goes. But I think, the extra pummels did give me a better chance. I just kind of didn't draw them in a way. Like, I didn't have the pressure on turns 1 and 2 that I wanted to have. And then in top 8, I lost to Briar. I think the deck has a favorable matchup into Briar. CNC Pummel is great. Chokeslam is great against Channel Mat Heroic. Ice Reacts trade pretty favorably. And Rune Blades just kind of have a tendency to miss sometimes. I don't think Liao Peitung missed, and he also played perfectly. So, well-deserved win by him. I think I kind of just made the trades I wanted to make, and they just, flipped tails every time. So I don't really have any regrets on the game itself. Pretty happy to top 8. Moving forward, do I think this Oldhim list was the best list for the tournament? I think it was fine. I think it was really good for me against the matchups that I played. I played into, Fi, and Briar, which I thought were pretty good matchups. I won against 2 of them, right? Played against Oldhim, which I think their deck was slightly better in the mirror, but I think the Sledge plan ended up working out. Arsenal pummel, swing Sledge, pummel them, and then block on their turn. Worked out pretty well. I also got a free matchup in Lexi. They were kind of targeting the Fi and Briar players, but they paired up against me, so that's pretty unlucky. But into the Dynasty meta, I think Oldhim is probably not a deck that I'm considering at the moment. Dash is very popular, very, very popular. The new Pulse Wave Harpoon has kind of increased her popularity. I don't think people have been playing with the Nitro Mechanoid as much currently, but I do think that, Dash just has a lot of tools right now, and I would probably focus on a different hero. But I think if you wanted to play Oldhim into Dash, or if you wanted to play Oldhim into this meta, I think this aggro list is very good. I don't think you can fatigue. I don't think there's any deck that you can actually fatigue nowadays. The top decks of Fi, Dromai, Icelander, Dash, all of these decks they have better late game than you do. So I don't think fatigue is very viable right now. I do think that aggro trading aggressively with Ice Reacts is the way to go. Yeah, that's kind of it for the video. Thank you for sticking all the way to the end. Like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.